Hello everybody, it's me, Fee, White Zulu, and welcome to another reading of my book. The last time I told you about my being discovered by my parents that I'd been out riding, they didn't know how long for, with a priest, a young priest, and somebody had run away from the St. Anne's prep, so there was a space for me for one term. The last term before the long summer holidays. So I was off to the St. Anne's Prep. And this is chapter 30, St. Anne's Prep Part 1. I looked like a stick insect in my overlarge navy school blazer, which I had to wear over a blue cotton dress. The St. Anne's Prep uniform was pale blue, the Virgin Mary's blue, and navy, and I had on white ankle socks and clumpy brown lace-up shoes. Firmin Cooley was one of the more complimentary names given to me by my older sisters, and referred to those starved Indian outcasts labouring in paddy fields they had seen in photographs in books at their school. My parents called Indians by the derogatory coolies as a matter of routine, not to their faces. They were always chilly but polite to the gentle Hewson family who ran our gold mine of a general store in Nottingham Road, but about them in general. I had shot up to 5 feet 8 inches in the space of 18 months, and I'd had severe growing pains in my legs, particularly at night. On one occasion they'd hurt so badly that I'd resorted to creeping, whimpering in agony down the passage to my parents' bedroom and woken my mother. Uncharacteristically, she'd given me an aspirin rather than a bollocking for disturbing her. My long, skinny legs were hinged by knobbly, scabbed knees, and my arms appeared to belong to a skeleton. I felt awkward and clumsy in my uniform and hunched, lowering my head. "Stand up straight," snapped my mother as she held the old box brownie type of camera impatiently down in front of her, trying to fit in as much of her garden as possible. She'd posed me in front of her best border, which radiated with every shade of pink, red, blue, and cream. And in the early summer sunshine, and I'd been told to drape Miss Bunn, my pajama case rabbit, over the little brown suitcase which held my overnight stuff. My great big trunk had been packed by the servants and was already in the boot of the old Pontiac. I was not looking forward to going to the prep. It didn't bode well that I was taking the place of a girl who'd run away, and I sat in the car with butterflies in my tummy all the way to Hilton Road, as it was called in those days. It's now Hilton, overlooking Pietermaritzburg. The next morning at 6, I sat bolt upright on my narrow iron bed in the dormitory, jolted awake by the deafeningly loud clanging of a brass handbell. Miss Grindley, our matron, and named Grindlebug by the girls as she was so crabby, bustled through the long dorm, her laced-up sensible shoes clumping on the bare wooden floors. She jangled the bell vigorously as she went, and I could hear her progress right through to the next room in the cavernous Victorian red brick building. I looked around to find that all the other girls had already leapt to their feet, grabbed their sponge bags, and raced off to the big echoing bathroom. There they formed a line, and groggily I joined the end, holding my sponge bag in my hand. The bathroom was divided into about a dozen wooden cubicles, with a half-size enamelled bath standing on ball and claw feet on the chilly red concrete floor in each one. Grindelbug had run an inch of tepid water and then splashed a liberal amount of Dettol in. The stink of it made my eyes water as I stood and waited, while the girls ran into the cubicles and shut the doors. My turn came and I was hustled into my lukewarm bath, cloudy with disinfectant. I got in cautiously and began to wash. As I was about to finish, a head popped over the adjoining cubicle wall, and a tall girl with curly ginger hair and a pale speckled face stared at me. "Why are you washing yourself down there?" she shrieked, a nasty, grimacing expression on her face. Another head appeared over the other cubicle wall. "What are you doing, Colleen? She's washing herself down there," repeated the girl with a squeal. "It's so rude." I looked up at them nonplussed. What was going on? The two faces continued to stare accusingly at me. Then, "Why are you spying on her anyway, Colleen?" The second girl turned on the first, screaming at her in disgust. "Are you some kind of lessee?" At this stage, Grindelbug started yanking the cubicle doors open and the faces disappeared. I hunched over my raised knees, puzzled and frightened by this encounter. Even my sisters didn't behave like this. I was chased from dormitory to breakfast and classes in what seemed like breathless haste. I was the only new girl and had no idea what was going on, but ran frantically with any gaggle of other girls. They all looked the same to me. So many pink faces and blue dresses. I always bolted in the wrong direction whenever the bell rang, inevitably ending up in one big hall or another, surrounded by the starling chatter of 50-odd other girls, mostly younger than I was. Even the smallest ones, the 5-year-olds, seemed to know what they were doing and carried the right books and pencil cases to their classes. I was given a desk at the back of a classroom and a whole lot of books and pencils, including a fountain pen which squirted bright blue ink merrily and indelibly over my hands, dress, and books. Everything was out of control, and I never had the right things for our various classes. A mentor would have been nice, just to explain to me where the gym class was and what I was supposed to wear, and that I was supposed to wear the black bloomers for that. Blue bloomers were for every day, and white bloomers were for Sundays. For those who don't know, bloomers are a pair of waist-high brooks with elastic pant legs, and because I was so skinny, were really baggy on me. Miss Turnbull, nicknamed Turney, with her grim mouth, mottled old face, and wispy grey bun, pushed a trunk full of uniform at me to unpack and put away neatly in my footlocker. Evelina had always done everything for me. I had no idea how to even fold a shirt. I'd never done it in my life. I also had to make my bed, a mysterious challenge of hospital corners and stuff I'd never heard of. Furiously, Turney stripped it repeatedly and shouted at me to make it again, properly this time. We could have discovered perpetual motion if we hadn't had to get to a morning assembly, and I hastily dragged the bedding back on as she stamped away and slunk after her at a safe distance like a wary mongrel. Meals were in a long dining hall, and I was given a place on the right-hand side at the top end, right next to Grindelbug. They made us eat everything on our plates, and this was a hideous ordeal. I had no interest in food, particularly stuff that looked even more insipid and overcooked than Masangu's nursery meals had ever been. The stringy vegetables lurked in watery puddles, and the meat was flat grey slices of unidentifiable origin. They gave us riced potatoes every day. These were boiled potatoes put through a mincer and utterly dry and tasteless. On Sundays we had roast meat, allegedly beef, and the same vegetables, but this time with anemic, leathery roast potatoes. Unfortunately for me, Sundays was when Dot came to eat and oversee lunch at the prep. She was Miss Dorothy McEwen, headmistress, or more correctly, Lady Warden, which gave her the more accurate sounding title of prison wardress of St. Anne's Diocesan College, the senior school. She struck terror into the hearts of parents and pupils alike, and nobody ever wanted to incur Dot's wrath. I didn't know any of this, however, although I'd vaguely heard my sisters mention Dot in their conversations about school, usually accompanied by a shudder. So, when she arrived after I'd been at school for just 2 days, there I sat at her right-hand side. Sorry about these noises. I don't know where they're coming from. We have to ignore them. There I sat at her right-hand side. She was tall and thin, sat bolt upright, and had icy, piercing, pale blue eyes, rather like I'd read the Gestapo had in Dad's war books. "How are you enjoying your first days at school?" she asked me, after a long silence as I struggled with my rubbery grey and unidentifiable meat. "It's okay so far," I replied casually, and shrugged. There was the hiss of intake and breath as all the girls and staff at the table fell silent, outraged at my insolence. Every face turned to me, and then to Dot, who also remained silent, taken aback, possibly for the first time in her life. Nobody had ever spoken to her in that offhand manner. I lost my appetite, such as it was, and put my knife and fork together on my plate. "What do you think you're doing?" demanded the Lady Warden. "How dare you leave good food on your plate? Now eat those peas." I looked at the yellowish, grey, round things lying there, swilling about in what looked like dishwater, but could have been gravy. That's what they were. I decided to make an early stand for my rights. I don't like peas. By now, the other girls had finished their meals and were passing plates up to be stacked. I quickly picked up my own plate and, lifting the one on the top of the pile, slipped my uneaten meal in and replaced the top plate, squashing those hated peas flat. Dot glared at me. She looked as if she was going to make me take my plate back from underneath the others, now piled on top, and force me to eat what I'd left, flattened as it was, but then decided not to. You will have no pudding, you disobedient little girl. That was fine by me, as pudding at the prep was a succession of repulsively slimy, whitish, wobbly stuff like tapioca or frog spawn, as the girls called it. That was one less dish which I'd have to sabotage. Unfortunately, it turned out to be vanilla ice cream, my ultimate favorite, as a special treat on Sundays. I'd certainly started off on the wrong foot, since I was to have 5 years to serve under Dot. I'd sealed my fate. Underneath the main buildings at the prep was a warren-like dungeon of music cells. I was told to go to the music mistress to be tried out for the choir. Once I'd found the right room, I discovered Miss Lodkin waiting for me. She was a frightening sight. She was far shorter than I was, and fat, with a mass of frizzy, pitch-black hair. It looked suspiciously as if somebody had sprinkled white talcum powder on the roots, I noticed, and she had a bosom which jutted out from under her double chin, which made her look as if she had 2 torpedoes strapped there. She was also wearing a yellow polo neck jersey with horizontal black stripes, which did her no favours at all. She looked like a very bad-tempered bumblebee. I was quite confident that I was an excellent singer. After all, I'd spent my life riding around alone, singing at full volume the songs which I'd heard from my older sister's records on the short-wave radio. She asked me if I knew All Things Bright and Beautiful, and I nodded, yes. We'd sung that at Mrs. Bannatyne's, our brief and useless so-called governess. Miss Lodkin played the introduction, and I let fly. I sang lustily, my mouth wide open and my head tilted back. I was astonished when she stopped after the first line, quietly closed the piano lid, and folded her hands on her lap. "I don't think we'll be needing you for the choir," she said curtly, and sent me away. I was crushed, mortified that all this time I thought I could sing. Told me, and then I remembered that, yes, my sisters had thrown objects at me whenever I'd sung, but I thought that was just because they were jealous. Excuse me. Got a dry throat. I had yet another blow to my already withered ego when in class one day we were asked to write a composition in Afrikaans. I enjoyed writing and did a nice long piece about a small boy who had an adventure with a big fish he'd caught. I turned to read out my work. I walked confidently up to the platform and stood there. Die naam van my story is Frikkie and sy vis. The name of my story is Frikkie and his fish, I began. The entire room full of girls instantly erupted with laughter. I was surprised, as my story did have some amusing bits in it, but not in the title. Carry on, said the Afrikaans mistress, her face emotionless. Frikkie, I had to stop as the girls were now howling with laughter, and a couple of them had dropped books and pencils onto the floor in their mirth. I looked at the teacher again. She smiled at me, an odd sort of a smile, and told me to carry on. To the accompaniment of screams of laughter, some of my fellow pupils now dabbing at their streaming eyes, I soldiered on to the end. Thank you, said the teacher, and I went back to my desk at the back to sit down. What was that all about? I asked the girl who sat next to me. Why did you call the boy Frikkie? She asked, still in paroxysms of laughter. Because it's an Afrikaans boy's name, I said with all the dignity I could muster. It's the word for a French letter, you idiot. Didn't you know? She asked. I looked at her blankly. She turned around to smirk at the others. She doesn't know what a French letter is, she cackled mockingly. She was quite right. I didn't know what a French letter was a name for a condom. And nor was I going to expose my ignorance by asking either. I was even more isolated after that, ostracized by the others, as I was such a misfit with my limited English vocabulary, as I was far more fluent in Zulu. Also, my utterly hopeless lack of knowledge of apparently the most basic words such as lazy and French letter was getting me nowhere. So I spent a lot of the time playing donkey with the younger girls, leaving my own classmates to play the two same Elvis records, Blue Suede Shoes and Wooden Heart, over and over again in the common room, and snigger loudly when the pair of school guinea pigs squealed out during their constant and noisy mating marathons. If they could catch my eye, they'd nudge each other and shout, "Hey, Frikkie!" across the playground. That's it for this one. Hope you enjoyed it. I want to thank John Moslane very much for all his help in getting these videos out. And also, if you want more information and lots more photographs, please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.